The Tribal Health and Human Services Department of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes is proud to present Good Medicine, a program dedicated to the wellness of the Flathead Nation. The mission is summarized quite simply: a healthier people, a stronger nation. We will strive to make Good Medicine a reliable source of ideas and information about health issues so that everyone can make informed decisions about their own lifestyle and health care. You will meet health professionals, tribal government and spiritual leaders, and interesting people from the tribal community discussing important health issues that profoundly affect us all.
Hello, this is Good Medicine. I'm your host, Larry Pitts. Today we are honored to have Gyda Swaney. She is our clinical supervisor for tribal mental health. Today, Gyda, we want to get into the topic about depression slightly, and probably not the word slightly. It is a problem that we see throughout the reservation, probably throughout America, not synonymous to us as Native Americans. Before we get into that, let's go over you just a little bit. Let's find out, Gyda, what kind of expertise you have, your training, maybe even get into what your position with the tribe is. Could you go tell us a little bit?
Sure. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Montana and got a double major in psychology and sociology. And then at the encouragement of my supervisor when I was working as a secretary at Native American Studies, Elaine Gillum Claiborne encouraged me to go into graduate school, and I applied and was accepted at the clinical psych program at the University of Montana. They take a scientist practitioner model, so while I was in training there, I worked at the prison, I was at the state hospital, worked with juvenile sex offenders, juvenile sexual abuse victims. So my training was pretty broad, and then I was fortunate enough to come up here to SKC and taught a class, 2 classes actually, one in developmental psych and one in intro to psych. And then I went off and did my internship at Boston City Hospital at BU Medical School in Boston, and spent a year there and worked on the alcohol unit and did psych evals for the Roxbury Health Center there in Boston, and was immediately spotted as someone who didn't belong.
Okay. What about your position with the tribe? What is your current position? And
I'm
what is in
presently the clinical supervisor. However, I have no one to supervise.
Good position, huh?
It's great. We're short-staffed. Hopefully, 2 more people will come on board here very soon. I've been alone in the program since July and have been trading call with Stan Fleming, so that has been kind of difficult, but I think we're going to hire 2 people, so that should happen very soon. And
so basically what you're saying is that you probably need a vacation fairly soon? Right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, since we want to talk about depression, you want to talk about what depression is, and then maybe while we do that, then we'll go into the symptoms of depression, so people may understand it a little bit.
Sure.
Gyda, go ahead.
First of all, depression as it's defined clinically is the vegetative symptoms that affect us to qualify as being depressed include having a disturbed sleeping. Either we're sleeping an enormous amount, it's very difficult for us to even wake, or when we sit down for a minute, we're immediately falling asleep. Or we're depressed if we can't go to sleep. So there's those 2 extremes. So depression affects our sleep. It also affects our initiative. So the inability to develop goals even for the day, simple things like getting up, going to class, having coffee with a friend, simple day-to-day kinds of things of being able to get your housework done. There's a tendency for depressed people to postpone that and finish the end of the day without having accomplished very much. There's also a strong sense of guilt that comes with depression. Depressed people believe that if they would have done something differently, things would have turned out better. For example, a depressed child might think that if they would have studied harder or been a better kid, Dad wouldn't have gone drinking, or Mom wouldn't have gotten angry. So there's a tendency to pull responsibility onto themselves. It also affects people's energy, just waking up, just energy to do things. It affects our concentration and attention. So for a depressed child or a depressed adult, if they're a student or when they're working, it's difficult for them to concentrate and pay attention while they're at their job. In fact, I've seen depressed people have difficulty watching a television show because they'll kind of lose interest in it, forget what they're watching, and surf off to something else. Or they're listening to someone and their mind is somewhere else. They're preoccupied thinking about something else, and they just don't pay attention. So for a teacher or a parent to be irritated with a child that's depressed is actually pretty inappropriate, because the kid's probably not even attending to what they're saying. It also makes school difficult, having difficulty concentrating, or simple tasks at work can also become very overwhelming. It also affects our appetite. Some depressed people don't want to eat at all. There's the other kind of depressed person that wants to eat lots and lots. And it may be a way that they get some kind of artificial kind of energy through the sugar that they're eating, but their appetite is somehow changed, or food doesn't even look good. It's so they almost have to force themselves to eat. Then our psychomotor behavior is affected. I like to describe it as we either turn into a couch potato, it's difficult to get up and get moving, or we're the Energizer bunny. We're kind of running around and just keep going and going, and it's almost exhausting for people to be around us because we're flitting from one task to another, oftentimes leaving this task undone to start another one, so that it's pretty chaotic. So there are those two kinds of ways that depressed people behave when they're depressed. And then also with depression comes suicidal ideation. And it may not necessarily because there was anything that even happened in their life. Depressed people will often say, I have no idea why I'm depressed. I have a wonderful husband, I have a wonderful job, I live in a beautiful home, and I'm depressed. I'm thinking about killing myself. And it is frightening to them because it is so, it comes unbidden, just out of nowhere, and there's the thought, I wish I would die. And that's often very difficult for people when they're depressed. That's oftentimes what will bring people in to talk when those thoughts become very frightening and overwhelming. Also, our mood is affected. You see a lot of irritability. Lots of times depression is associated with sadness, and lay people will describe depression as being sad, but not necessarily. An individual can be depressed and very irritable. And part of that can be as you'll ask them a question, and because our thinking is kind of so retarded, like the mechanisms start to grind, and I know the answer to that. I'll think of it, I can think of it, and it requires so much energy to just even pull that from our brain that we get irritated and just push people away and want them to go away and leave us alone. And that's part of the reason depressed people isolate, because of all of that energy that it takes. Some people feel blue, tearful, driving down the road, all of a sudden they're tearful and weeping and have no idea why. Sadness and depression look very much like grief. And the first year that someone is recovering from alcohol dependence looks very much like depression. There's a lot of these same kind of symptoms that are occurring. And I'm reluctant to diagnose somebody depressed if they're in their first year of abstinence from a chemical, because so much of withdrawal from alcohol looks like depression too.
So do you think depression is quite often misdiagnosed?
Oh, yeah. I think that in our culture, the belief is that we can just snap out of it, just pull yourself together and get out of this depression and get up out of that bed and do something. You don't need to be sitting around here doing that. We don't say that same thing to diabetic people. You know, snap out of it. You don't have, we don't.
That's right.
I mean, we don't. We don't say that to them. We give them support. There's a certain kind of exercise regimen that they need to be on. They need to eat correctly. They need to even, for lack of a better word, embrace the fact that they are diabetic. And that's difficult to do. Just like for someone who is depressed, they need to come to that awareness that they are indeed depressed. And we don't, nobody wants to be depressed. It's not fun, and people will resist that and say, oh no, I can do this. I just need to do this and this and this, and my life will get better. In my experience, I have watched people work for a very long time at trying to snap themselves out of the depression. And they'll do that by running. And that works. And that works. Or they develop that really positive kind of attitude, and that too is very helpful. But I think one of the things that we don't pay attention to is the biological base to it. There's a chemical component there that doesn't come unless we participate in some kind of a treatment. And we can't just talk ourselves out of being diabetic and say, come on, pancreas, start producing some more insulin.
Doesn't work too well.
It doesn't work well. And there's that attitude in the public that, well, you could just snap out of it and not be depressed anymore.
Well, I hear, you know, and I've even used it, oh, you're just depressed. We so minimize what depression is. Is it a large problem that we're dealing with?
I actually believe that the incidence of depression here on the Flathead Reservation is higher, largely because we come from such a small gene pool, that I would, in a family where one person is diagnosed with depression, it is often probable that up to 80% of that family will be depressed. There's a strong genetic component to it. So if you look back at your ancestors, and if they were depressed, exhibited any of these kinds of symptoms, but probably stoically and were really strong about taking care of themselves, they very likely were depressed. Treated it the best that they could, and then here we are, this generation, with lots of undiagnosed depression. And people don't want, I mean, mental health is well,
there's a stigma.
There's a huge stigma about that, and people come in, am I crazy? No, you're not crazy, you're depressed. Just like, are you if you're diabetic, are you crazy? No, you're diabetic, and this is what that means. And it's frightening for some people to think that there's something wrong with them mentally when it's just depression. But in this very small gene pool here on the reservation, I believe that we did have people that were depressed, our ancestors, and as a consequence of that, there are some families that have a lot of depression in them.
Generational, basically.
Generational, yeah.
All right, well, Gyda, we're going to break right now for our next segment, which is Let's Ask Marjorie, and we'll be right back to ask you some more questions after this segment. So thank you, Gyda. We're with Marjorie Bear Don't Walk. This is our segment on Let's Ask Marjorie. Marjorie, you wanted to make an announcement today to people out in TV land, so go ahead.
Thank you, Larry. Tomorrow, February 27th, Thursday, the Tribal Health and Human Services will be closed from 9 o'clock until 1, and so that all of the employees can attend a meeting at the Tribal Council.
Okay.
And the reason that we're going to be at the Tribal Council is there are lots of questions about what we're doing at Tribal Health, and on Tuesday, members from the Elmo community brought in a petition with 92 names on it, wanting to discuss a full-time employee being placed at the Elmo Fitness Center, and healthcare questions about the providers we have at Health and Human Services. And over the 3 years that Tribal Health has been functioning under a compact with IHS, Tribal Health and Human Services has functioned with a structure that has been the same year after year, and that structure has allowed the participants of Health and Human Services to spend more money on health care than we are presently being funded for. And so last year, all of the people contributed to spending the healthcare dollars over the allowed budget. And because the structure hasn't changed, and I've been trying to change the structure, there's great concern about the direction that we're taking. And so we will be heading in the very same direction financially that we went last year. And we will be in financial trouble by the end of this FY if some real serious decisions and changes aren't made. And so we are being pressured by certain individuals to conduct our business in the same way we always have, and we've been told by the Tribal Council not to hire anyone, to evaluate where we are, and to look at becoming more financially accountable. And so that direction and the direction of the petition collide, and so the Tribal Council has invited all of the employees to attend the meeting and to voice their opinions and to voice their concerns. And so that's what will happen tomorrow. And if any of the people watching would like to attend the meeting and they have concerns or complaints about Tribal Health, they're invited to be there also.
Okay, so anybody is welcome to come.
As far as I'm concerned.
And even people who might be in support of what's going on.
Right.
All right. Thank you for your time. We go back to our regular program now, so thank you for being with us. Marge, thank you. Hello, we're back to Good Medicine. We're talking about depression with Gyda Swaney, and we just got through talking, Gyda, somewhat about the symptoms of depression. And, you know, as I think about depression, you know, I notice in the wintertime when the sun's not up as much, that there seems to be more depression. You want to talk about like seasonal type of depressions?
That is a very good question. Now, during this time of year, when we're getting less sunlight, it's very common for people to slip into what we call seasonal affective depression. What happens is that we need sunshine, and our body naturally produces serotonin. when we're outside, doesn't have to even be a bright day, but just be outside in the sun. It can be overcast. Go for a walk. But during that hour that you're out, the sunlight goes into your eyes, stimulates your pineal gland, and naturally produces serotonin. So there's research that as the further you go north, the greater is the incidence of seasonal affective depression. And I suspect there's a chunk of folks here on this reservation that are also troubled with it. We actually have 2 lights. We actually loan lights to people. It has to be a certain number of lumens. It can't just be an electric bulb.
Okay.
So it's a special kind of light that you get, but we check them out to people for the winter. And that's part of their therapy, is to sit in front of light for a period of time. Again, it needs to be prescribed pretty carefully by a psychiatrist, but you can get great benefit from a light. And I think I've kind of naturally gone into talking about different ways to treat depression. And I want to talk about some interesting research that has been done. And why I want to talk about this is because I think our elders very wisely were taking care of us and probably our depression. I think that it is interesting, in the darkest and longest nights of the year, they have us up jumping. And they have us up, staying up all night. And research shows that if you exercise, your depression lessens. Research shows that if you stay up 1 night a week, your depression lessens.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. And here our elders were taking care of us by having us do that. I know that it's a lot more complicated than that, but I think it's interesting, and it has been interesting to work with people who are depressed, that go off to medicine lodges and return, of course, feeling much better for 1,000 reasons, but they're also treating their depression by just the physical activity and staying up.
So you're sort of giving a recommendation that people use the fitness centers a lot more, especially in the wintertime, than they do? And
They should. They should. We should all do that. You should make exercise a regular part of your day. If you suffer from depressive symptoms, you will feel better. And if you've ever run and then stopped, you know the difference between your mood. But it's difficult when you're depressed to just get up off the couch and get going. There's the tendency to pull the drapes and stay inside.
right.
So one woman, very wise woman, said to me, obligate, don't motivate. You just have to do it like the Nike commercial. When you say you're going to exercise, just go and do it. The rewards comes afterwards, and rarely are we motivated to do it at the beginning. Depressed people have a lot of difficulty just getting there. But once you get there, the benefit is very great. So exercise is a really excellent way of treating your depression. A second way is something we call cognitive behavioral therapy, and that is actually changing how we think. Depressed people think a certain way. The glass is half empty, is what the depressed person says. Another person will say it's half full. And depressed people tend to think in very black and white terms. They either were a total failure, or it was a success. But a depressed person will really, it's as if they're looking at a large picture, and there's all of this good part, but all they focus on is this one bad part, and they'll pull that real close to their face, and it will really filter how they look at the world. Depressed people really are self-punishing and say ugly, awful things to themselves And rarely would anyone say these things to ourselves. During the break, we were talking about an individual that you know who tends to say those kind of black and white things.
Right.
I didn't do a thing all day. Really, did they? I mean, if you trace it back, I'm sure that they did do things, many things, and that's part of what we do in therapy, is identify those things that they have done. And I feel like when I'm working in therapy with someone who's depressed, I'm doing a lot of cheerleader, you know, good for you, that's good. And to stop with the scolding that they do, because they will go back to their place and flog them, well, symbolically, I hope not really,
Right.
but they will go back and really punish themselves and criticize themselves. So
They minimize things very much, so their
yeah.
successes.
Oh, yeah. And that takes the joy out of life. If somebody gives you a compliment, then what we do is turn it in our head if we're depressed and say, oh, anybody can do that. No, that's not true, but it will just take the joy out of life.
So someone out there listening today who might suspect that they're in depression, what kind of options can you give them fairly quickly here, that how they can access your service, how they can start to address this situation, this problem?
I'd recommend that they start exercising daily, eat a good balanced diet, and really pay attention to what their thinking is like. Oftentimes people will take alcohol or drugs to feel a little better, because you feel a little happier. And I think that that's part of how our people got caught in it. I wonder if we weren't medicating some depression by taking some alcohol and drugs. Well, it works short run because we'll feel better. So I really strongly discourage you from taking any alcohol or drugs. That really, in the long run, is not helpful. But to do that, to get into therapy with an individual is helpful. And then I would encourage people to consider taking some medication. Again, the chat about we don't scold the diabetic and say, produce more insulin. I don't scold the depressed person and say, produce more serotonin. You just need to snap out of it. So I want to say help is all around you. You go to your elders and spend some time. The traditional things that the Native people did and still do today are very helpful for depression. Participate in those.
All right, so what you're saying, that there is help around the corner, that there is something physical, but that if we start to do a logical type of, treatment protocol, there is help.
Oh, it's a very treatable illness, and we know the sooner that it's treated, the sooner the depression goes away, and the longer it is between episodes.
All right.
So it's very treatable illness.
Well, Gyda, it's been a great half hour. I want to thank you for your time. This is Gyda Swaney. She is our clinical supervisor for tribal mental health. I want to thank those of you who are watching. If you have any questions or so that you would like to ask, get hold of Gyda or mental health through the number that will be broadcast at the end of the session. We want to thank you, and join us next week again. Thank you very much.
Good Medicine is your program. We hope you watch this and subsequent programs to stay informed about your health care. And we'd like to hear from you about how we're doing. Please direct any comments or suggestions you have to us. You can reach us at